The sign felt ridiculous the moment I held it up. I had made it on a piece of poster board I found in the supply closet at work, the thick kind that doesn't bend easily, and I'd used a black Sharpie with a fresh tip. Jamal Williams, printed in neat block letters, no frills, no underlining. I'd considered adding something decorative, a border maybe, or a small flower in the corner, but I'd stopped myself. That wasn't the kind of gesture this was. This was a practical errand. A friend picking up a friend's brother from the airport because the friend was needed elsewhere, at a hospital bedside, holding her mother's hand. I was the backup, the auxiliary. The person you called when you needed someone reliable and unobtrusive, someone who would show up with a sign and a car and no expectations. I'd been that person for Imani for 6 years. It was a role I'd learned to wear comfortably, like a coat that fit well but wasn't technically mine. The baggage claim at PHL hummed with the low-grade chaos of late evening arrivals. The carousel for the Los Angeles flight hadn't started moving yet, and clusters of passengers stood in loose formations around the belt, scrolling through phones, adjusting shoulder straps, staring at the empty metal track with the particular exhaustion of people who'd been breathing recycled air for 5 hours. A woman in a gray blazer leaned against a pillar, her eyes closed. A man near the carousel kept checking his watch, then his phone, then his watch again, as though the sequence might produce a different result. The overhead lights were the color of weak tea, and somewhere behind me, a child was crying in the particular way children cry in airports. Not loud, not urgent, just a steady, worn-out whimper that suggested the trip had been too long and the day too big. I'd positioned myself near the center of the arrival area, where the crowd thinned out enough that anyone coming through would see me. I held the sign at chest height, and I caught myself doing what I'd done a dozen times already that evening. I was rehearsing his name in my head. Jamal. Jamal Williams. Jamal. It was a name I'd known for years, a name attached to photographs on Imani's phone and stories told over Sunday dinners at the Spruce Street townhouse. Jamal's firm won that award. Jamal sent the most ridiculous birthday card. Jamal says the view from his apartment is, and I quote, aggressively Los Angeles. I'd laughed at those stories, nodded along, filed the details away, but I'd never said his name out loud, not once. It had lived entirely in my head, a private collection of facts about a person I'd never met, and now I was about to speak it into the open air, and something about that felt like a threshold I hadn't quite prepared myself to cross. The passengers from the Los Angeles flight began to trickle out in 2s and 3s, a young couple with matching duffel bags, an older man in a Dodgers cap, a woman pulling a roller bag that kept catching on its own wheel. I scanned each face, my eyes moving past them quickly, and then I realized I didn't actually know what I was looking for. I'd seen photographs, yes, Imani's phone, a family Christmas card, a candid shot from a rooftop party 3 years ago. But photographs were not the same as a person walking toward you through airport fluorescence. Photographs were static and curated. They didn't show you how someone moved, how they carried their shoulders, how their eyes worked a room. And then a tall figure stepped through the crowd, and I stopped scanning. He was taller than I'd expected, though I'd known he was tall. He wore a dark jacket over a simple shirt, and he carried a single bag slung across his body, the strap cutting diagonally across his chest. His eyes were moving across the crowd the way mine had been moving, searching, sorting, dismissing. And then they landed on my sign, and something shifted in his face. It wasn't a smile exactly, not yet. It was a softening, a settling, the particular expression of someone who has been looking for a thing and has found it. His gaze lifted from the sign to my face, and his eyes met mine, and I felt the moment stretch. He knew me. He looked at me and he knew exactly who I was, and I could see it in the way his expression resolved itself, the way his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, the way his mouth shaped itself around a word he hadn't spoken yet. I'd spent 6 years being the person who knew about him. It had never occurred to me that he might have spent those same years being the person who knew about me. He stepped forward, and the crowd seemed to part around him, not dramatically, not like a movie, just the natural physics of a person moving with purpose through a loose cluster of bodies. And he stopped a few feet from me, and he said, "Hannah, not are you Hannah? Not you must be Imani's friend, just my name," spoken like a fact he'd been carrying for a while and was finally setting down. The sound of it in his voice, a voice I'd never heard before, a voice that was warm and a little rough at the edges from the dry cabin air, landed somewhere deep in my chest. I'd heard my name spoken 1,000 times, 10,000 times, in every register from professional to affectionate to impatient. But I'd never heard it spoken by someone who'd been waiting to say it, someone who'd been practicing it maybe, the way I'd been practicing his. I opened my mouth. I'd rehearsed this moment, and I'd planned to say something like Jamal. "Hi, I'm Hannah, Imani sent me." A whole sentence that would establish the terms of the encounter and keep everything safely inside the lines I'd drawn. But he'd already said my name, and the sentence I'd prepared felt like a door I was closing before it had even opened. So I said, "Jamal." Just that. Just his name, and my voice was quieter than I meant it to be, and I watched his face register the sound of it the way mine had registered the sound of mine. He smiled then, a real smile, one that reached the corners of his eyes and creased them slightly. "You made a sign," he said. I looked down at the poster board in my hands, suddenly aware of how large it was, how earnest, how unnecessary. "I didn't know if you'd recognize me." "I would have," he said it simply, without weight, like it was an obvious fact. Like of course he would have recognized me. Like he'd been looking at photographs too. The carousel behind us lurched to life with a mechanical, and bags began to slide down the chute and circle the belt. Jamal glanced toward it, then back at me. "I've got just the carry-on," he said, gesturing to the bag across his chest. "I'm only here for a few days. Work's waiting." The words landed with a small, quiet prick. A few days, of course. He was flying in for a crisis, not a relocation. He had a job in Los Angeles, a life in Los Angeles, and this was a temporary disruption, a visit to a hospital room, and then he'd be gone again. I'd known that. I'd known it the whole time. But hearing him say it, standing in the baggage claim with my ridiculous sign and the echo of my name still settling in the air, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel, a small, sharp tug of disappointment, not because I wanted something from him, because I'd only just met him and already the clock was ticking. "Right," I said, "work. The firm's got a deadline. I told them I'd be back by Wednesday. That's 3 days. It's 3 days." He met my eyes again, and something passed between us. Not a promise, not an apology, just an acknowledgement that we'd both noticed the math. "But I'm here now." I nodded. I folded the sign in half, then in half again, and tucked it under my arm. "I'm parked in the short-term lot." It's not far. Lead the way." We walked toward the exit together, and I was acutely aware of the space between us, not too close, not too far, the careful distance of two people who'd just met but who'd known each other's names for years. The automatic doors slid open, and the night air hit us, cool and damp, the particular smell of Philadelphia in late autumn, wet pavement, exhaust, the faint salt of the river somewhere beyond the parking structures. Jamal walked beside me, his stride matching mine, and I thought about Imani sitting in a hospital room, waiting for me to bring her brother. I thought about the sign I'd made, the letters I'd printed so carefully. I thought about the way he'd said my name, like he'd been saying it in his head for years and was finally letting it out. Something had shifted. I could feel it, a small tectonic movement in the architecture of my life, the careful structure I'd built around myself, the periphery, the helper, the reliable friend who showed up and didn't ask for more. A new center was forming, and I didn't know yet whether it would hold or whether it would dissolve the moment Jamal got back on a plane to Los Angeles. But I'd felt it the moment he said my name, and I was afraid of what it might mean. But I kept walking, and he kept walking beside me, and the night stretched out ahead of us, and I didn't look back. The Spruce Street townhouse settled around me the way it always did, a quiet exhale of radiator heat and old wood. I'd let myself in with the key Imani had given me 3 years ago, the one I'd stopped thinking of as borrowed somewhere around the 2nd year. The foyer light was on a timer, a soft amber glow that caught the edge of the Persian runner Patricia had refused to replace despite the fraying corner. I knew that fraying corner. I knew the particular creak of the 3rd stair, the one that announced itself only when you stepped on the left side. I knew the smell of this house, lemon polish and something deeper, something that had no name but meant safety. I'd dropped Jamal at the hospital first. He'd wanted to go straight there, and I hadn't argued. The drive from the airport had been mostly silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable but wasn't easy either, both of us still adjusting to the fact of each other in the close dark of my car. He'd thanked me at the drop-off circle, his voice careful, and I'd watched him disappear through the sliding emergency room doors before pulling away. Imani had texted me while I was in the parking garage, "Mom's stable, go home, get some sleep, I've got him now." But I didn't go home. I drove to Spruce Street instead, and now I was here, in the kitchen, at midnight, filling the kettle with water I didn't need to measure because I'd made tea in this kitchen 100 times before. The kitchen was the warmest room in the house. Patricia had painted it a buttery yellow years ago, and the color had softened with age into something closer to cream. The cabinets were the kind that didn't quite close unless you nudged them just so. The countertops were laminate, worn smooth at the edges where decades of hands had rested. A corkboard near the refrigerator held a chaos of photographs. Imani at her college graduation, Patricia at some garden party I'd been invited to but hadn't attended, Jamal in a hard hat at what looked like a construction site, his smile easy and unguarded in a way it hadn't been at the airport. I'd seen that photograph before. I'd studied it, actually in the quiet way I studied all the evidence of him that existed in this house. The kettle began its low hum, building toward the whistle. I reached for the tin of chamomile Patricia kept on the 2nd shelf, and my hand found it without searching. That was the thing about this kitchen. It knew me. "You didn't go home." The voice came from the doorway, and I turned. Jamal stood there, one shoulder against the frame, his duffel bag still slung over his arm. He'd changed out of the jacket he'd worn on the plane, and his shirt was rumpled in a way that suggested he'd been sitting in a hospital waiting room chair for hours. His eyes were tired, but they were on me, and something in his expression shifted when I met his gaze. "Imani sent me home," I said. "I just didn't listen. She does that, sends people home." He set the duffel down by the door and stepped into the kitchen. "You don't listen." It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation, delivered with the same quiet weight he'd given my name at the airport. I poured the water into the teapot and watched the chamomile bloom, the steam rising in a curl I could feel against my wrist. "Patricia's stable," I said. "The doctors ran another scan when you got there. No new bleeding. Her speech is still a little slow, but she recognized Imani right away. She asked for you." Jamal pulled out a chair and sat. The table was a small round one, the kind meant for 2 people, and his knee was close to where I stood at the counter. I could feel the nearness of him without looking. "She asked for me," he repeated, and his voice caught on the last word. "She did. She said your name twice before Imani could tell her you were on your way." I poured a 2nd cup of tea and set it in front of him. The ceramic was warm, a mug with a chip in the handle that I'd always avoided until tonight. He wrapped his hands around it and didn't drink. His fingers were long, an architect's fingers, and I noticed the callus on his thumb, the one that must have come from a pencil or a drafting tool. "You know a lot about what happened," he said, "about what the doctors said. I was here when Imani called me. I got to the hospital before the ambulance did." I sat down across from him. "Patricia's been in my life for 6 years. I know her medical history. I know her medications. I know which doctor she likes and which one she doesn't." Jamal looked at me then, and his gaze was different from the one at the airport. There, it had been recognition. Here, it was something closer to assessment. He was taking me in, not as the woman with the sign, but as the person who knew his mother's medications and her preferred doctors and the exact cadence of her voice when she asked for her son. "You've been here," he said. "All this time, you've been here, and I've been—" He didn't finish the sentence. "In Los Angeles. In Los Angeles." He said it like the words tasted wrong. "I came back for holidays, for a few summers. I kept thinking I'd run into you." I felt my hand still on the table. "You knew about me. Imani talks about you constantly. She has for years. There are photographs of you all over this house." He gestured toward the corkboard without looking at it. "You're in the Christmas ones. You're in the ones from that trip to the shore. You're in the background of half the pictures on Patricia's phone." I knew about the photographs. I'd seen them. I'd been in them, and I'd also been the one taking them. And I'd also been the one who sometimes stepped out of the frame at the last second because I wasn't sure if I belonged there. But I hadn't known that he'd noticed. I hadn't known that he'd been looking. "I kept missing you," he said. "Every time I came home, you were somewhere else, a work trip, a weekend away. I started to think you were avoiding me." I opened my mouth to deny it, and then I closed it, because the truth was more complicated than that. The truth was that I had known when he visited. Imani told me every time. "Jamal's coming for Thanksgiving," she'd say, and I'd feel a pull toward the townhouse that I couldn't explain, and then I'd find a reason to be busy, a client dinner, a manuscript that needed an urgent look, a friend who needed me. I'd made myself scarce, not because I didn't want to meet him, but because I'd wanted it too much. Because meeting him had felt like a door I wasn't ready to walk through. "I wasn't avoiding you," I said. I stopped. The word wouldn't come. "You were what?" I looked down at my tea. The steam had stopped rising. I don't know how to explain it. Jamal didn't push. He just sat there, his hands around the chipped mug, his knee still close to mine under the table. The kitchen light caught the side of his face, and I could see the exhaustion in the lines around his mouth, the way his shoulders curved forward slightly as if he'd been holding himself upright for too long. "You're here now," he said. "That's what matters." The words landed somewhere in my chest, a place I didn't have a name for. I wanted to tell him that being here had never been the question. The question was whether being here meant I belonged here, or whether I was just the person who showed up because she knew how to make tea and recite medication lists and fill the quiet spaces that families left empty. The question was whether I was wanted or whether I was useful. But I didn't say any of that. I said, "You should drink your tea. It's getting cold." He looked down at the mug as if he'd forgotten it was there. Then he lifted it and drank, and the gesture was so ordinary, so human, that something in me loosened. "I have to go back," he said after a moment. "To Los Angeles. I have a project that can't wait, a client who's already been patient." He set the mug down. 3 days, that's all I could get. 3 days. I'd known that since the airport. He'd told me in the car, or maybe I'd inferred it from the way he'd talked about his flight, the tightness of the timeline. But hearing him say it now, in the kitchen light at midnight, the words landed differently. They landed like a countdown. "That's not a lot of time," I said. "No, it's not." His gaze met mine again, and there was something in it I couldn't place. "But it's what I have." The radiator clicked in the silence that followed. The house settled another fraction of an inch into its foundation. I could hear the distant hum of the refrigerator, the one Patricia always said needed replacing. I knew that hum. I'd listened to it on a dozen other late nights, sitting at this same table with Imani after a bad date or a hard week, or just because we'd wanted company. But this was different. This was Jamal across from me, his knee under the table, his duffel bag still in the doorway, his 3 days ticking down in the quiet dark. "I'm glad you're here," I said. The words came out before I could stop them, and they were true in a way that surprised me. "I'm glad you came." "So am I," he said. "I've been waiting a long time to meet you, Hannah." He said my name the way he'd said it at the airport, with the careful weight of someone who'd practiced it, and I heard it now for what it was. Not just recognition, but intention. He'd been waiting, he'd been looking, he'd been noticing my absence in the photographs and wondering where I was, and now I was here, in his mother's kitchen, at midnight, and he was looking at me like I was the thing he'd come home to find. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know if it was real, or if it was just the intensity of the moment, the crisis that had thrown us together, the proximity that would dissolve the second Patricia recovered and Jamal got back on a plane to Los Angeles. I didn't know if I was a person to him, or a symbol, the steady presence in his family's life that he'd been grateful for from a distance and was now seeing up close. But his knee was still near mine under the table, and his tea was still warm, and the kitchen light was still on, and it would be on for hours yet, and I wasn't ready to leave. "Tell me about the project," I said, "the one that can't wait." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled, a small thing but real, and he said, "It's a library in Silver Lake. They're restoring the original facade, and I'm the one who has to figure out how to keep it standing while they rebuild everything behind it." And just like that, the conversation opened, not away from the weight of the night, but into it. We talked about his work and my work, about the city he'd left and the city I'd stayed in, about the strange way a life could split itself between two coasts and still feel like it belonged to neither. We talked until the tea was gone and the kitchen had gone fully silent and the clock on Patricia's stove showed a time I didn't bother to check. And somewhere in the middle of it, I stopped wondering whether I belonged in this house and started simply being in it, the way I always had, the way I'd learned to do over 6 years of showing up. The kitchen light stayed on, and we stayed under it. The kitchen light had shifted while we weren't looking. What had been a warm, pooling glow at midnight had thinned into something paler, the first gray wash of a February morning pressing against the window above the sink. I noticed it only because Jamal had turned his head toward the glass, and the angle of his face changed, the tiredness around his eyes suddenly legible in a way it hadn't been before. "You should sleep," I said. "So should you. I'm not the one who flew across the country today." He didn't answer that. He turned back to me, and the kettle clicked off behind him, and I stood to pour the water because standing was easier than sitting still under the weight of whatever was about to happen next. My hands found the mugs, the familiar curve of Patricia's ceramic, the one with the hairline crack along the rim that I always avoided and always forgot to mention. The tea bag bloomed brown in the water. Steam rose. I carried both mugs back to the table and set his in front of him, and he wrapped his hands around it without drinking, the way people do when they need the heat more than the liquid. "I've always wondered something," he said. I sat down. My chair scraped the floor, a sound too loud for the hour. "Okay." He watched me for a moment, and I watched him watch me, and then he smiled, a small thing that didn't quite reach the corners of his mouth. "What's it like, being a publicist?" I blinked. "That's your question?" "One of them." I could have given him the polite answer. The one I gave at parties, at author events, at any gathering where someone asked what I did and I needed to fill 3 minutes of airspace without revealing anything about myself. I work with independent presses. I handle author tours. It's a lot of logistics. But it was nearly dawn, and I was too tired to perform, and he was too observant to let the performance stand. "It's mostly making people feel seen," I said. "Authors, I mean, they spend years on a book, and then it comes out, and they're terrified no one will care. My job is to make sure someone does." He nodded slowly. "So you're good at showing up." The words landed in a place I hadn't prepared for. I looked down at my tea. I guess I've had practice. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that waits, that holds space for the next thing, that knows the next thing is coming and doesn't rush it. Outside, a car passed on Spruce Street, its headlights sweeping a brief arc across the ceiling before vanishing. The house settled around us. Somewhere upstairs, in a room I'd never been in, the radiator exhaled its familiar rattle. "You know what I really want to ask," he said. It wasn't a question. I looked up. His eyes were on me, and they hadn't moved, and I understood that the detour through my career had been a courtesy, a way of letting me decide whether I was ready for the real conversation. I could have said no. I could have deflected again, but I was in Patricia's kitchen at 5 in the morning with a man I'd spent 6 years avoiding, and I was too exhausted to keep avoiding him. "Then ask." He set his mug down. His hand stayed on the table, and I noticed the way his thumb rested against the wood, the way he didn't fidget or look away or do any of the things people do when they're about to say something difficult. "Why have you never been here when I came home?" The question was quiet, not accusatory, not wounded, just quiet, the way a door closes when you don't want to wake anyone. But it was the question, the one I'd been bracing for since the moment I saw his name on Imani's phone 6 years ago, the one I'd rehearsed answers to in the shower and on the bus and in the dark of my own apartment where no one could hear me practicing a name I had no right to practice. I opened my mouth, closed it. The kettle had gone silent, the radiator had gone silent. The whole house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to say something true. "I was afraid," I said. Jamal didn't move. Of what? I wanted to look away. I wanted to check my phone, or refill the kettle, or do any of the small, useless things I did when a conversation got too close to the bone. But his eyes were on me, and they were kind, and I had spent 6 years being the person who showed up, and showing up meant staying in the room even when the room asked something of you, of overstepping. My voice came out thinner than I meant it to. "Imani is my best friend. Patricia is..." I stopped. I didn't have a word for what Patricia was. This family, this house, the way they let me be here, it's the most important thing in my life, and I was terrified that if I met you, if I was here when you were here, it would change something. That I'd want something I wasn't supposed to want, that I'd become someone who wanted more than she was offered. I heard myself say it. I heard the words land in the space between us, and I heard the truth in them, the truth I hadn't let myself name until this exact moment, in this exact kitchen, with this exact man. I had been afraid of wanting more. I had been afraid of being seen wanting it. And I had been so careful, so meticulously careful, to stay on the periphery of this family, to never ask for more than they gave me, to never let anyone see that I was hungry for something I couldn't name. Jamal was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower than before. "Hannah, my name, just my name." But the way he said it, the way he let it sit in the air between us without anything else attached to it, told me he had practiced it too, that he had said it to himself in his apartment in Los Angeles, that he had wondered what it would sound like out loud, that he had been waiting for this moment just as long as I had. "I knew you weren't there," he said. "Every time I came home, I looked for you. I asked Imani where you were, and she always had an answer. You were busy, you were working, you had plans. And after a while I stopped asking, because I thought maybe you didn't want to meet me. Maybe you were happy with the family the way it was, and I was the one thing that didn't fit. That's not." I started, but the words caught. "I know," he said. "I know now." He leaned forward. His elbows rested on the table, and his hands were still, and I could see the weariness in his shoulders, the exhaustion of a day spent in a hospital waiting room and a night spent in a kitchen with a woman he'd been watching from across the country for 6 years. "I practiced your name," he said, "in the car on the way to the airport, in the plane, walking through baggage claim. I kept saying it to myself because I was afraid I'd say it wrong when I finally saw you. I was afraid you'd hear it and think I didn't know you." My throat tightened. "I practiced yours too. I know." He said it simply, not like a confession, like a fact, like something he'd known before I told him, something he'd seen in the way I held the sign at baggage claim, in the way I said his name when he first stepped through the crowd. And I understood, sitting there in the gray February light, that we had both been practicing, both been waiting, both been watching from a distance we thought was safe, a distance that had turned out to be nothing but the space between two people who were too afraid to close it. "I don't want to be on the periphery anymore," I said. The words came out before I could stop them. "I don't want to be the person who shows up and then goes home and pretends she doesn't want more. I've done that for 6 years, and I'm tired." Jamal reached across the table. His hand covered mine, warm and steady, and I didn't pull away. "You're not on the periphery," he said. "You never were. You were the person I kept asking about, the person in every photograph, the person my mother talked about like you were already hers." I couldn't speak. The kitchen light was pale now, and the window above the sink had gone fully gray, and somewhere in the house a clock ticked toward 6, toward 7, toward the hour when Imani would wake and Patricia would need us and the world would resume its ordinary shape. But in this moment, in this kitchen, with Jamal's hand on mine and his name still settling into the air between us, the world felt like it had already changed. "You should sleep," I said again, but my voice was different now, softer, and I didn't pull my hand away. "So should you." Neither of us moved. The kettle stayed silent, the radiator stayed quiet, and we stayed there, at Patricia's table, in the thin gray light of a morning that had arrived without either of us noticing, holding on to something neither of us was ready to name, but both of us had already felt. I stayed in the living room because leaving would have meant admitting I'd been waiting for him to come back downstairs. The book in my lap was one I'd pulled from Patricia's shelf an hour ago, a paperback with a cracked spine and a receipt from 2003 tucked inside the front cover. I'd turned 3 pages, maybe 4. The words sat on the paper without becoming anything, and every time the house made a sound I looked up before I could stop myself. Jamal had gone to the hospital at 7 that morning. I'd heard the front door close, the careful way he pulled it shut behind him, the same way I'd done 100 times when I was leaving before anyone could ask me to stay. He'd come back around 10, and then there'd been a shower running, and then the kitchen cabinets opening and closing, and now it was past noon, and I was still on Patricia's couch with a book I couldn't focus on and a cup of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The house felt different without Patricia in it. Not empty, exactly. The radiators still clicked, and the refrigerator still hummed, and the floorboards still complained in the same places they always had. But the quiet had a waiting quality to it, like the house itself was holding its breath for her to come home. Or maybe I was the one holding my breath. I heard his footsteps on the stairs before I saw him. Heavier than Imani's, slower than Patricia's. I'd learned the difference without meaning to. The way you learn the sound of a car pulling into the driveway when you've been listening for it for years. He came into the living room with his phone in his hand, and his brow creased in a way that made him look less like the man I'd sat across from at the kitchen table last night, and more like someone who was already halfway somewhere else. "Everything okay?" I asked. He looked at me and his expression cleared, but not fast enough. "Yeah, just work stuff." He held up the phone like it explained something. "I need to take this outside. Won't be long." I nodded and turned back to my book. The gesture was automatic, the kind of thing you do when you want someone to believe you aren't watching them leave. The page I was on had a sentence about a woman walking through a garden, and I went through it 3 times before I realized he'd already stepped out onto the front stoop and closed the door behind him. Not all the way. The latch didn't catch. The cold air pushed through the gap, a thin ribbon of it that found my ankles before it found anything else. And his voice came through too, low and measured, the way people talk when they're trying not to let the person on the other end hear how much they want the conversation to be over. I told myself I wasn't listening. I turned another page. The woman in the garden had stopped walking. She was standing by a fountain now, and I couldn't remember if the fountain had been there before or if I'd missed something important in the paragraphs I hadn't gotten through. "I know we're behind," Jamal said, and his voice had a tightness to it that I hadn't heard before. "But I told you, I'm in Philadelphia. My mother's in the hospital." A pause. The cold air kept coming. I kept not reading. "No, I can't get back tomorrow. That's not possible." Another pause, longer this time. "Look, I understand the client's anxious, but the facade specs aren't going to finalize themselves. Tell them I'll have the revisions by end of week. I can work remotely from here." The word remotely landed somewhere in my chest and stayed there. I closed the book. I didn't mark my place. I set it on the cushion beside me and watched my hands do it. The careful, deliberate way I placed the paperback down, like it mattered where it landed. It didn't. Nothing about the book mattered. What mattered was the word remotely and the way Jamal had said it, like Philadelphia was a temporary inconvenience, like the Spruce Street townhouse was a place he was working from, not a place he was staying, like I was someone he'd met during a stopover. Through the window I could see him. The front stoop was narrow, just wide enough for two people to sit side by side if they didn't mind their shoulders touching, and Jamal had one hand braced against the railing and the other holding the phone to his ear. His profile was sharp against the gray February sky, the line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders. He was wearing a sweater I hadn't seen before, a dark green one that made him look like he belonged in a city with better light and taller buildings. Los Angeles, Silver Lake, a library restoration project with a facade that needed to be finalized. I knew these things because he'd told me them last night, and I'd held on to every detail like they were something I could keep. But they weren't things I could keep. They were things that belonged to a life 2,000 miles away, a life that had been running before Patricia's TIA and would keep running after she recovered, a life that didn't include the Spruce Street townhouse or the buttery yellow kitchen or the woman who'd been sitting at the table waiting for someone to come home for 6 years. He'd said 3 days. At the kitchen table, with the tea going cold between us, he'd said he was here for 3 days. And I'd known that. I'd known it from the moment Imani called me from the hospital, from the moment I wrote his name on the poster board at the airport. 3 days, a finite window, a visit with an expiration date. But somewhere between the kitchen table and this moment, somewhere in the thin gray light of a February morning, and the way he'd reached across the table and touched my hand, I'd let myself forget. I stood up. The movement was too quick, the kind of thing you do when you've been caught doing something you shouldn't, even though no one was watching. I walked into the kitchen, and the floorboards creaked under my feet in the same places they always did, and I didn't care if Jamal heard me through the open door. I didn't care if he knew I'd been sitting in the living room listening to a conversation that wasn't mine to hear. What I cared about was the cold knot forming in my stomach, the familiar shape of it, the way it fit into the space that had always been there, the space I'd carved out for myself 6 years ago when I decided that being on the periphery was safer than wanting to be at the center. I filled the kettle. I set it on the stove. I turned the burner on and watched the blue flame catch under the metal. All of it was automatic, the muscle memory of 100 cups of tea made in this kitchen, 100 moments when I'd needed something to do with my hands so I wouldn't have to think about what I was feeling. The kettle started to heat. The water made a low sound, the kind it makes before it boils, and I stood at the counter with my back to the door and my hands flat against the laminate, the worn, smooth surface Patricia had never gotten around to replacing. I heard the front door close. This time the latch caught. "Hey." Jamal's voice came from behind me, and I didn't turn around. "Sorry about that. Work stuff. It's fine." My voice sounded like mine. That was the thing I told myself. It sounded like mine, and it sounded like it was fine, and if I kept my back to him long enough, maybe both of those things would be true. "Everything okay?" he asked. "I'm making tea." I heard him move closer, not all the way into the kitchen, just to the doorway, just close enough that I could feel the space he occupied without having to look at him. Hannah, my name, the one I'd practiced saying to myself in the car on the way to the airport, the one I'd been so careful with, like saying it too loud would break something. He said it now like it was a question, like he was asking me something I didn't know how to answer. "I should probably head back to LA soon," he said, "for work. The project's hitting a rough patch and they need me on site." I nodded. My hands were still flat on the counter. "I know. I heard you on the phone." The silence that followed was different from the silences we'd had before. The ones at the kitchen table had been full of something, the weight of what we weren't saying, the charge of what we were about to. This one was just empty. This one was just the space between two people who'd gotten close too fast and were now remembering why that was a bad idea. "Hannah," he said my name again, and this time I heard something in it that I didn't want to hear. An apology, an explanation. The beginning of a sentence that would end with "this was never going to work," or "I didn't mean to make you think," or some other careful, kind thing that would let me down gently and leave me exactly where I'd always been, on the outside of a family I'd spent 6 years trying to belong to. The kettle began to whistle. I took it off the burner before it could get loud. "You don't have to explain," I said. "You have a life in Los Angeles, a job, a project. I get it." I poured the water into the mug. The steam rose up, and I let it hit my face, let it be the reason my eyes felt hot. 3 days. You said 3 days. That was always the plan. He didn't say anything. I heard him shift his weight, heard the floorboard creak under him the way it creaked under everyone who stood in that doorway. I thought about turning around. I thought about looking at him and letting him see whatever was on my face, but I didn't. I kept my back to him, and I watched the tea steep, the water turning from clear to amber, and I waited for him to say something that would make this feel less like what it was. He didn't, and that was worse. "I'm going to head back to the hospital soon," I said. "Check on Patricia. Imani's probably ready for a break. Hannah, it's fine, Jamal." I said his name like it was just a name, like I hadn't practiced it, like it didn't mean anything. Really, it's fine. I took the mug and I walked past him, through the doorway, into the living room where my book was still sitting on the cushion where I'd left it. I didn't pick it up. I didn't sit back down. I stood by the window and looked out at the front stoop where he'd been standing 5 minutes ago, the gray February light, the bare branches of the tree in front of the house, the cold air that had pushed through the door and found me before I was ready to be found. Behind me, the kitchen stayed quiet. Jamal stayed in the doorway, and the distance between us, the one I'd spent all night pretending wasn't there, opened back up like a door I'd forgotten to close. The cold had settled into the stone by the time I heard the front door open behind me. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on the street, on the last smear of light fading behind the row houses across the way, on the bare branches of the tree that had been there since before I ever walked up these steps. I'd been on the stoop for 20 minutes, maybe longer, long enough for my fingers to go stiff inside my coat pockets, long enough to talk myself out of everything I'd almost said in the kitchen that morning. The door clicked shut, footsteps on the concrete behind me, then nothing, a pause. I could feel him standing there, the weight of him, the shape of his silence against my back. "You're out here," he said. I nodded without looking up. "I am." A duffel bag hit the stoop with a soft thud, his overnight bag, the one he'd packed upstairs while I sat down here convincing myself that the smart thing, the right thing, the only thing, was to let him go without making it harder than it already was. He lowered himself onto the step beside me, close enough that I could smell the soap from the shower he'd taken an hour ago, close enough that his shoulder nearly brushed mine. He didn't speak right away. He sat with his forearms on his knees, looking out at the same street I'd been staring at, the same gray light, the same bare tree. "Why have you been so quiet?" he asked. His voice was low and careful, the way you'd ask someone if they were hurt and not sure they'd tell you the truth. I opened my mouth. I closed it. I'd had a whole speech prepared in my head, a tidy, reasonable explanation about timing and distance and the boundaries I'd spent 6 years learning to respect. But sitting next to him on the cold stone, none of it felt true anymore. None of it felt like anything except the same old fear dressed up in better words. "I've been trying to figure out how to let you go," I said, "and I'm not very good at it." He turned his head. His eyes found mine, and they didn't flick away, didn't search for an exit. He just looked at me, steady and open, and I felt the cold air catch in my throat. "I've been practicing your name," he said. I stared at him. "What?" "For years. Ever since Imani first showed me a picture of you. I'd see it on the corkboard in the kitchen or in one of her albums, and I'd say it to myself, 'Hannah,' just to see how it felt." He paused. His hands stayed still on his knees. It always felt like something I was supposed to remember. The air around us had gone thin, or maybe that was just me, just my lungs forgetting how to work. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, in my temples, in the places where my coat pressed against my skin. "I did the same thing," I said. "Your name. I practiced it." His expression changed, a small break in the composure he'd been holding. "You did? Every time Imani mentioned you, every time I saw a new photo on the corkboard, I'd say it in my head or under my breath if no one was around. Jamal, I was terrified I'd say it wrong the first time I met you." I swallowed. I was terrified of a lot of things. Like what? I looked down at my hands, still buried in my pockets, like wanting something I wasn't supposed to have, like being the person who reached for more than she'd been given and lost everything because of it. He didn't answer right away. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full of everything we'd both been holding, everything we'd both been practicing alone in separate rooms, separate cities, separate years. "Is what we feel real?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. "Or is it just the crisis? Just 3 days in a hospital waiting room and a kitchen that's too small and too much time to think?" I lifted my head. His face was close, closer than it had been a moment ago. I could see the faint line between his brows, the way his mouth held tension he wasn't letting go of. "I don't know how to answer that," I said, "because I've been asking myself the same question since you got off the plane, and every time I think it's just the crisis, I remember that I've been thinking about you for 6 years, that I've been looking for you in every story Imani told me, that I've been waiting for you without letting myself admit I was waiting." "I know," he said. "I know exactly what you mean." He said it the way you'd say I've been in the same room, I've been holding the same door open, I've been waiting too, and then I didn't think anymore. I didn't weigh the risks or measure the distance or calculate what I stood to lose. I leaned across the cold space between us on the stoop and I kissed him. It wasn't careful, it wasn't practiced. His mouth was warm against the February air, and his hand came up to my jaw like he'd been expecting this, like he'd been waiting for it, like he'd known before I did that I was going to be the one to close the gap. I felt his fingers at the edge of my jaw, and then his other hand on my knee, and then the solid weight of him, of this, of something I'd been afraid to name for so long I'd forgotten it had a name at all. I pulled back first. My breath came uneven, and my lips were cold where the air hit them again, and his eyes were still on mine, still steady, still the same eyes I'd seen in photographs on a corkboard in a kitchen I'd always thought of as mine but not quite mine. "That felt real," I said. My voice came out rough. "Did that feel like the crisis to you?" He laughed, a short exhale that wasn't quite a laugh, and his thumb moved once against my cheekbone. "No, that felt like 6 years." I closed my eyes. I let the cold air press against my face, let the sound of his breathing settle into the space beside me. When I opened them again, the street was darker, the street lamps flickering on one by one down the block, and his duffel bag was still sitting on the step beside him, and he was still here. "You have a flight," I said. "I do. And a project in Silver Lake that's in a rough patch. Also true. And a life in Los Angeles." He nodded. 2,000 miles of life in Los Angeles. I let the words sit there. 2,000 miles. It was a real number, a real distance, and I couldn't pretend it wasn't. But I also couldn't pretend that the man beside me hadn't just told me he'd been saying my name to himself for years. I couldn't pretend that I hadn't just kissed him on the front stoop of a house where I'd spent 6 years learning to stay in my lane. I don't know how this works, I said. I don't know what the next step looks like. I don't have a plan for 2,000 miles. Neither do I. He shifted on the step, turning to face me more fully. His knee pressed against mine through the layers of denim and coat and cold air. But I know I don't want to get on that plane and pretend this didn't happen. I know I don't want to go back to looking at photographs and practicing your name alone in my apartment. I've done that. I'm done with that. So what do? We take it one step at a time. He said it without hesitation, without the careful hedging I'd been doing all day. I find ways to be here more. I call you. I come back for weekends. I figure out how to make the project work from a distance when I can. And you, he paused, you stop hiding from me when I come home. I felt my mouth twitch, the start of something that wasn't quite a smile. I wasn't hiding. You were absolutely hiding. Okay, I was hiding. He smiled then, a real smile, and it reached his eyes, and I saw the thing I'd only ever seen in photographs, the thing that had made me practice his name in the first place. It was right there, in front of me, on the cold stoop of the Spruce Street townhouse, and I hadn't missed it. I have to go, he said. The flight's not going to wait. I know. He stood up. He picked up his duffel bag, and then he reached down and took my hand, and he pulled me to my feet, and he didn't let go right away. He held my hand on the stoop in the dark, with the street lamps casting long shadows down the block and the cold air pushing at our coats. I'll call you when I land, he said. You'd better. And I'll be back, sooner than you think. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice to say anything else. He let go of my hand. He walked down the steps to the sidewalk, to the car that was waiting at the curb, the one I hadn't noticed pull up. He opened the passenger door and put his bag inside, and then he turned back. He looked at me, standing on the stoop where I'd been sitting 20 minutes ago, where I'd been sitting for 6 years if I was honest about it, where I'd finally stopped practicing and started doing. Hannah, he said. My name, spoken out loud, not practiced, not whispered, just said, into the cold air, into the dark, into the space I'd finally let myself occupy. Yeah, I've been waiting for you. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I stood on the stoop and watched him get into the car, watched the taillights pull away from the curb, watched them disappear down Spruce Street until they were just 2 red points in the dark, and then nothing. The cold was still there, the tree was still bare, the house was still behind me, warm and yellow and waiting, and I was still on the stoop, but I wasn't on the periphery anymore. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The taillights of his car had disappeared down Spruce Street, and I stood on the cold stone in the dark with the street lamps casting their long shadows down the block, and I let myself feel everything at once. I had spent 6 years on the periphery of a family I loved, and I had spent 6 years calling that love, and underneath both of those things I had been afraid of wanting more than I had been given, afraid of being seen wanting it. And here was the thing that surprised me most, standing on that stoop with the cold air still on my face and the taste of him still on my mouth. He had been afraid, too. He had been on a different stoop, in a different city, looking at the same photographs from the other side and being afraid of the same things. We had been doing it to each other for 6 years without either of us knowing. The truth was that I had been waiting just as long as he had. The truth was that staying small had cost me more than I had ever let myself admit, and the moment he said my name at the airport, the cost came due all at once. I thought about that, standing on the stoop. I thought about how long I would have kept going if Imani had not made that phone call from the hospital. How many more years I would have built around the careful, peripheral, useful version of myself. And I thought, and the question kept coming back to me, the one I could not put down, whether anyone listening to this had ever practiced someone's name in their head for years before saying it out loud. I turned. I walked up the stoop. I opened the door to the warm yellow kitchen, to the house that was waiting, to the life that, finally, I was not going to be on the edge of anymore. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me keep writing them, and it tells me which stories you want more of. Share it with the friend you watch romance stories with, the one who will text you in the morning saying she stayed up too late. And come back next time, because there is always another story arriving. Until next time, love, Isabel.